The Cursed Manuscript. There's a place at the edge of town where the streets grow quieter and the houses sit closer together. Their windows like empty eyes staring out at nothing. It was in this forgotten part of town that Evelyn Harper found herself on an autumn afternoon, drawn to an estate sale like a moth to a dying flame. Evelyn was a writer, but not in the way that most people imagined. She wasn't the glamorous author with a best-selling novel and a fancy book tour. No, Evelyn was the kind of writer who spent nights hunched over a keyboard, with half-empty coffee cups and crumpled paper scattered around her. She was the kind of writer who lived in her story, even if the world hadn't yet taken notice. The estate sale was the perfect place for someone like Evelyn, full of old things with forgotten histories. The house itself seemed to sag under the weight of its memories, its once grand facade now cracked and weathered. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old paper. Evelyn wandered through the rooms, her fingers trailing over the worn spines of books, the smooth surface of ancient trinkets, looking for something, anything that might spark her imagination. And then she found it. In a corner, buried beneath a pile of tattered paperbacks and forgotten magazines, was a manuscript. It wasn't like the others, with their glossy covers and mass-produced pages. No, this was different. Its leather cover was cracked and aged, the edges frayed as though it had been handled too many times, by too many hands. There was no title, no author's name, just a strange symbol embossed on the front. A symbol that sent an involuntary shiver down Evelyn's spine the moment she touched it. The pages inside were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. It was incomplete, the story cutting off abruptly in the middle of a sentence, as if the author had simply stopped writing one day and never returned. Evelyn's heart raced as she flipped through the pages, drawn in by the dark, atmospheric prose, the haunting descriptions that seemed to seep into her very soul. This was what she had been looking for. Something raw, something real, something that spoke to the darkness inside her. Without a second thought, she bought the manuscript and took it home, not knowing that she had just invited something far more sinister into her life. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. The manuscript sat on her desk, its presence almost palpable in the dim light of her apartment. She found herself staring at it, her mind racing with possibilities. Who was the author? Why had they never finished the story? What had happened to them? The questions gnawed at her, and before she knew it, she was at her desk, the manuscript spread out before her, a pen in her hand. The story was unlike anything she had ever read before. It was dark, yes, but there was something more to it. Something that she couldn't quite put her finger on. The words seemed to pulse on the page as if they were alive, as if they were drawing her in deeper and deeper into their twisted world. She began to write, her pen moving almost of its own accord, as if guided by some unseen force. But as she wrote, strange things began to happen. The first sign was the cold. It started as a slight chill, nothing unusual for an old apartment in the middle of autumn. But as the night wore on, the temperature dropped lower and lower, until Evelyn could see her breath misting in the air. She pulled a blanket around her shoulders, but it did little to ward off the icy cold that seemed to seep from the very walls. And then there were the shadows. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, the tricks of a tired mind playing in the corners of her vision. But the shadows grew darker, more solid, shifting and moving in ways that made no sense. They flickered just at the edge of her sight, darting out of view the moment she turned her head. And then there were the whispers. Soft, almost too quiet to hear, but they were there, murmuring just beyond her understanding. words that she couldn't quite catch, but that filled her with an inexplicable sense of dread. She tried to brush it off, to tell herself it was just her mind playing tricks, that she had spent too long immersed in the dark story. But the more she wrote, the more real these occurrences became. Evelyn soon found herself lost in the story, her days and nights blending together in a blur of words and shadows. She hardly left her apartment, the outside world fading into insignificance as the manuscript consumed her. The shadows became more than just fleeting glimpses. They began to take shape, forming figures that lingered at the edge of her vision. Tall, gaunt figures with hollow eyes that seemed to watch her, waiting for something. And the whispers. The whispers grew louder. They became voices, distinct and insistent, calling her name, urging her to continue, to finish what she had started. She tried to ignore them, tried to focus on the story, but the voices were relentless, growing more demanding with each passing day. It was around this time that Evelyn discovered the manuscript's dark history. She had always been curious about its origins, and in a rare moment of clarity, she decided to do some research. What she found chilled her to the bone. The original author was a man named Gideon Blackwood, a reclusive writer who had lived in the same town many years ago. Gideon was known for his dark, gothic tales, stories that delved into the macabre and the occult. But his final work, the manuscript that now sat on Evelyn's desk, was different. It was said to be cursed, a story so dark, so twisted, that it had driven its author to madness. Gideon had disappeared without a trace, leaving the manuscript unfinished. Some said he had been consumed by the very story he was writing, that the characters had come to life and dragged him into their world. Evelyn didn't want to believe it. Curses were just stories, after all, nothing more than the product of a superstitious mind. But the more she wrote, the more she began to doubt her own sanity. The figure that haunted her, the shadowy man with hollow eyes, was not just a figment of her imagination. His name was Silas Grimm, a vengeful spirit who hunted those who had wronged him in life. He was supposed to be just a character in the story, but now he was real, his presence growing stronger with every word she wrote. Desperate for help, Evelyn reached out to Professor Margaret Vale, a renowned expert in Gothic literature and the occult. Professor Vale was intrigued by the manuscript, but warned Evelyn of its dangers. The manuscript, she explained, was not just a story. It was a living entity, a malevolent force that had claimed the lives of those who tried to finish it. It fed on their fear, their creativity, drawing them deeper into its twisted world until they were consumed. But Evelyn was too far gone. The manuscript had its claws in her, and she couldn't let go. She had to finish the story, to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. As the days turned into weeks, Evelyn's world began to crumble. The apartment, once her sanctuary, became a prison. The shadows were everywhere now, no longer confined to the edges of her vision. They moved with purpose, creeping closer and closer, their hollow eyes fixed on her. The voices, once whispers, were now a constant barrage of demands, filling her mind with dark thoughts, urging her to write, to finish the story. Sleep became impossible. Every time Evelyn closed her eyes, she saw them. Silas Grimm and the other characters from the manuscript, their faces twisted in torment, their voices echoing in her mind. Amelia, a character who had never been fully developed, appeared in her dreams, pleading with her to finish the story, to give her peace. But there was something off about Amelia, something that made Evelyn's skin crawl. Her pleas were desperate, almost sinister, as if she knew something that Evelyn didn't. And then there was Lucas Merrick, Evelyn first met Lucas when he appeared at her door one night. His face pale and drawn, his eyes haunted. He told her that his family had been cursed by the manuscript for generations, ever since his grandfather had come into possession of it. Lucas had spent years trying to destroy it, to break the curse, but every attempt had failed. He had followed the manuscript from owner to owner, watching as it destroyed their lives, always too late to stop it. He begged Evelyn to stop, to leave the manuscript unfinished, but she couldn't. She was too far gone, too consumed by the story. As the manuscript neared its end, the curse reached its peak. Silas Grimm wasn't just a ghostly figure anymore. He was real, and he was coming for her. Evelyn could feel his presence in the room, the air thick with his malevolence. The shadows closed in, and the voices became deafening, screaming at her to write, to finish the story. Amelia's pleas turned into demands, her once gentle voice now harsh and unforgiving. Evelyn knew that the manuscript was a trap, a cruel game that was designed to end in death, no matter what she wrote. But she couldn't stop, couldn't turn away. The manuscript had become a part of her, and she had to see it through. In a final, desperate act, Evelyn decided to subvert the manuscript's intentions. She wrote a new ending, one that sacrificed her own life to trap Silas Grimm and the curse within the pages forever. It was the only way, she realized, to break the cycle of death and madness. As she wrote the final words, she felt the shadows closen. Silas's cold breath on her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. The last word was written, and then there was silence. Evelyn was found the next day, slumped over her desk, the manuscript closed beside her, its pages stained with ink and something darker. The room was cold, the air heavy with a sense of finality. The shadows were gone, the voices silent. The manuscript was complete, but at what cost? The manuscript was taken away, locked in a vault where it would remain for decades, forgotten by all but those who knew its dark history. Professor Vale, who had warned Evelyn, would spend the rest of her life researching the manuscript, trying to uncover its origins and the truth behind the curse. But the manuscript remained a mystery, its dark power dormant, waiting for the next unwitting soul to uncover it. And somewhere, in the shadows, Silas Grimm waits, biding his time, ready to claim his next victim. As for Evelyn Harper, she is just another name in a long list of those who have fallen victim to the cursed manuscript. Her story, like so many others, is a cautionary tale, a reminder that some stories are better left unfinished. But for those who are drawn to the darkness, who cannot resist the pull of the unknown, the manuscript is always there, waiting, its pages hungry for the next story, the next soul. And the cycle continues. Thank you for joining me tonight. Until next time, sleep well, if you can.